The ventilator alarm should have been screaming. Instead, room 412 was silent. Rachel Monroe had worked the night shift at Mercy Valley Medical Center for almost 13 years. She knew every sound that belonged in an intensive care unit: heart monitors, oxygen pumps, footsteps, the quiet conversations of exhausted families. Silence was never one of them, especially not in a room where someone depended on a ventilator to breathe. She looked down at the tablet in her hand. Room 412. Walter Hayes, 78 years old, recovering from severe pneumonia, stable, scheduled to be discharged within 48 hours. Everything looked normal, except the monitor outside his room had suddenly gone dark. Rachel frowned. It wasn't supposed to do that. She pushed the door open. The room was almost completely dark except for a faint strip of moonlight slipping through the blinds. Her eyes immediately landed on the ventilator. The power cord dangled beside the electrical outlet. Unplugged for a heartbeat, she simply stared. Then instinct took over. She lunged across the room and plugged the cord back into the wall. The machine roared back to life. Warning messages flashed across the screen. Low battery. Ventilation interrupted. Critical oxygen level. Walter Hayes struggled desperately for air. Rachel hit the emergency button. Respiratory therapists rushed into the room. Within seconds, oxygen flowed normally again. His chest finally rose without fighting the machine. The numbers climbed. 79, 84, 90, 96. Rachel slowly stepped backward. If she'd finished helping the patient next door before checking room 412, Walter Hayes would have been dead. As the respiratory team examined the ventilator, Rachel looked around the room. Nothing appeared broken. Nothing had failed. The outlet worked perfectly. The machine passed every diagnostic test. One therapist quietly looked at Rachel. It didn't unplug itself. She nodded. I know. Just then, the elevator chimed at the end of the hallway. Rachel glanced through the doorway. A man wearing a charcoal jacket and a woman in a cream-colored coat stepped inside. Before the doors closed, the woman leaned toward the man and whispered with a smile, 5 more minutes, sir. She squeezed his hand. And everything we ever wanted is ours. The elevator doors slid shut. Rachel stood frozen. Something about that sentence made the room suddenly feel colder. Hospital security checked the overnight visitor log. Only 2 people had visited Walter Hayes: his son, Daniel Hayes, and Daniel's wife, Melissa. Both had signed out only 4 minutes before Rachel discovered the unplugged ventilator. Security exchanged uneasy looks. One officer immediately requested surveillance footage. Rachel returned to room 412. Walter still hadn't regained consciousness. She gently adjusted his blanket. For reasons she couldn't explain, she reached over and quietly locked the chart cabinet inside the room. Every instinct told her something wasn't right. She just didn't know what.
Yeah.
I remember waking up to the smell of antiseptic. At first I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard someone say my name, Mr. Hayes. I slowly opened my eyes. Everything felt heavy. My throat burned. My chest ached. The first face I saw belonged to a nurse I'd never met before. She smiled. Good morning. I was beginning to think you were too stubborn to wake up. I tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. She handed me a little cup filled with ice chips. After a few minutes, my voice finally returned. What happened? Rachel hesitated. You had a serious breathing emergency during the night. I know. She looked surprised. You do? I nodded slowly. I remember someone standing beside my bed. Her expression changed. Not completely, but I remember voices. My hands tightened around the blanket. I remember my son. Rachel didn't interrupt. I remember Daniel saying. I closed my eyes, trying to pull the memory together. Then I whispered the words exactly as I'd heard them. Dad always said family comes before money. A pause. Then another voice, Melissa. Cold, patient, almost cheerful. Tomorrow he'll change his will. Another pause. Then the words that refused to leave my mind. Unplug it. I don't want him waking up before the lawyer gets here. I opened my eyes again. Rachel had gone completely pale. I thought it was a nightmare. I swallowed carefully. But when I woke up, I realized nightmares don't unplug ventilators. She quietly pulled a chair beside my bed. Mr. Hayes, I need to ask you something. I nodded. She spoke gently. Were you really planning to change your will today? I looked toward the rain-covered hospital window. Outside, the parking lot shimmered beneath gray morning clouds. Not today, I corrected her. Tomorrow. My lawyer is supposed to come here tomorrow afternoon. She frowned. Why here? Because my doctor wouldn't let me leave the hospital. Another silence. Finally, she asked the question everyone else had been too polite to ask. Why were you changing it? I looked at the wedding ring I'd worn for 53 years. Even after my wife passed away, I'd never taken it off. Then I quietly answered, because 6 months ago, I discovered my son had already started spending an inheritance that didn't belong to him. And that was the day my family stopped feeling like a family. The first person I called after Rachel left the room wasn't my son. It wasn't the police. It wasn't even my lawyer. It was my granddaughter. Emma answered on the second ring. "Grandpa." The moment she heard my voice, she started crying. I thought. She stopped herself. I thought they were right. "Ooh." She hesitated. "Dad said your lungs got worse. He told me not to come because you needed complete rest." I slowly closed my eyes. "Emma, when was the last time you saw me?" 3 days ago. 3 days. Daniel had made sure she stayed away for 3 days. "I've been asking the nurses if I could visit," she whispered. "They kept telling me only immediate family approved by your son could come into the room." Rachel hadn't mentioned that. She probably didn't know. "I need you to come today. I'll leave right now." Before hanging up, she quietly asked, "Grandpa, yeah, you scared?" I looked toward the ventilator humming softly beside my bed. I was, but not anymore. Less than an hour later, Emma walked into my room carrying a paper bag from the little bakery across the street. She always brought me cinnamon rolls. Ever since she was 16, she set the bag on the bedside table before wrapping both arms around me. She held on longer than usual. When she finally stepped back, she looked closely at my face. "You've lost weight, so have you?" She laughed through watery eyes. "I've been worried." "I know." We sat quietly for a while. Then she looked at the ventilator. "Rachel told me someone unplugged it." I nodded. "Do you know who?"
Yes, she froze.
"You know." I heard them. Her face slowly drained of color. "I wish I were wrong." She pulled the visitor's chair closer. "Grandpa, I have to tell you something." "Go ahead." "Dad's been acting strange for months." "In what way?" "He keeps asking me questions." "What kind of questions?" She looked down at her hands. "Whether you still own the lake cabin. Whether the farm is paid off. Whether Grandma left jewelry. Even asked if your lawyer had called recently." I listened without interrupting. "I thought he was just planning ahead." She looked ashamed. "I didn't realize he was planning around your death." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I reached over and squeezed her hand. "This isn't your fault." Around noon, my attorney, Charles Whitmore, arrived carrying a slim leather briefcase. Charles and I had been friends for almost 30 years. He didn't begin by talking about paperwork. He simply looked at me. "You look better than I expected." I nearly wasn't here. Rachel quietly closed the room door before leaving us alone. Charles lowered his voice. "Rachel told me what happened. So she believes me. She believes the machine didn't unplug itself." He placed the briefcase on the bed. "I brought the revised will." I stared at the envelope for several moments. "This isn't about punishment." Charles nodded. "My son wasn't always like this." "I know. When Daniel was 9, he spent an entire summer building birdhouses with me." I smiled sadly. "They were so crook birds probably laughed at them." Charles chuckled. "You still have one?" "I do. It's hanging in my garage." Another silence settled between us. "What changed?" Charles asked quietly. "I've asked myself that every night." The answer hadn't arrived all at once. It came in pieces. The first piece appeared 6 months earlier. I had invited Daniel and Melissa over for Sunday dinner. Nothing special. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, apple cobbler. The kind of meal Margaret used to make every Sunday. Halfway through dinner, Daniel looked around the dining room. "This house is worth a fortune now." I laughed. "I suppose. You ever think about selling?" "No." "Why not?" "Because your mother built this place into a home." Melissa smiled politely. "But memories don't pay property taxes." I remember looking at her, not because of what she said, because of how quickly Daniel nodded. That was the first time I felt like they weren't visiting me. They were evaluating my assets. After dinner, I accidentally overheard them talking on the back porch. Melissa's voice carried through the open kitchen window. "We're drowning in debt." Daniel answered quietly. "I know. Your father has enough to solve all of it. He won't help. He doesn't have to." Then everything went silent. When they came back in silent, both of them smiled like nothing had happened. Over the following months, little things began disappearing. An antique watch Margaret had given me, my grandfather's hunting rifle, several pieces of old silverware. Daniel always had an explanation. "You probably misplaced them. Maybe you donated them. You're getting older." I almost believed him. Until my neighbor called one afternoon. "Walter, I think I saw your son's truck behind Miller's pawn shop. When I checked my gun cabinet that evening, 2 more rifles were gone." Daniel denied everything. There wasn't enough proof, only suspicion. But suspicion has a way of growing, especially when trust starts dying. 3 weeks before I landed in the hospital, Charles came to the house. We spent almost 2 hours reviewing my estate. When we finished, he asked one simple question. "Are you absolutely certain?" I looked toward Emma, who was trimming roses in Margaret's garden outside the window. "Yes." Charles made one final note. The new will would leave Daniel a single dollar. Not out of spite, but so he couldn't claim he'd been forgotten by mistake. Everything else, the farmhouse, the lake cabin, my savings, Margaret's jewelry, the land, would pass to Emma. She had never once asked for any of it. That was exactly why she deserved it. Back in the hospital room, Charles slid the paperwork toward me. "We're consigned today." I reached for the pen. Before the tip touched the paper, Rachel burst through the door. She was breathing hard. "What is it?" She looked from me to Charles, then quietly said, "Your son is downstairs. I somehow found out your lawyer is here, and he's demanding security let him into this room." Rachel didn't wait for permission to enter. She rarely looked shaken. This time she did. "Walter, security is trying to keep your son downstairs." Charles slowly closed the folder containing my new will. "What happened?" Rachel caught her breath. "He somehow knew your attorney arrived. Neither of us had told anyone, not my doctor, not the nurses, not even Emma, only Charles, Rachel, and I knew he was coming that afternoon." I looked at Charles. "Did anyone from your office know where we were meeting?" "My secretary. And me." He frowned. "She would never discuss a client's business." Rachel quietly added, "Your son isn't asking whether a lawyer is here. He specifically asked if Mr. Charles Whitmore had already gone upstairs." The room fell silent. Daniel hadn't guessed, he knew. The question was, how? A knock interrupted our thoughts. Hospital security supervisor Ben Lawson stepped inside. Tom, 20 years in hospital security had taught him never to overact. He closed the door behind him. "Hayes, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. What happened?" Ben held up a visitor badge. "Your son signed in under his own name. So he wasn't hiding, no. He demanded immediate access." "What did you tell him?" "That all visitors require patient approval. And," he said. Ben glanced down at his notes. "My father isn't thinking clearly. Anything he signs today should be considered invalid." Charles slowly removed his glasses. "He actually said that?" Ben nodded. "In front of 6 people. Charles looked at me. "He isn't here to visit. He's here to stop the will." Emma stood up. "I'm going downstairs." "No." I looked directly at her. "He'll only use you. Hay always does." She sat back down. She knew I was right. Daniel had spent years turning conversations into negotiations. If he couldn't convince you, he exhausted you. If he couldn't exhaust you, he intimidated you. And if intimidation failed, Melissa stepped in. She always knew exactly what to say, or exactly what not to say. Ben's radio suddenly crackled. He listened for several seconds. His expression changed. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "The daughter-in-law, Melissa. What about her?" "She isn't downstairs." "Then where is she?" Ben looked toward the hallway. "No one knows." The entire floor suddenly felt smaller. Rachel immediately checked every patient room nearest mine. Empty. Medication room. Empty. Family waiting area. Empty. Then one of the nurses called from the opposite end of the hallway. "Rachel." She hurried away. Less than a minute later she returned carrying something in her hand. A hospital visitor badge. "Melissa Hayes," found lying beside the emergency stairwell. Ben's jaw tightened. She took it off. Rachel whispered, "She's still inside the hospital." Charles quietly slid the will back into his briefcase. "We're not signing until this building is secure." I hated agreeing with him, but he was right. If someone had already unplugged my ventilator once, I wasn't giving them another opportunity. 20 minutes later, Ben returned. "We've searched 3 floors. No sign of her. Check the chapel," Emma said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. "Why the chapel?" She shrugged. "When Grandma was sick. Dad always went there when he wanted to avoid people." Ben nodded once. "I'll check." He disappeared again. While we waited, I found myself staring out the window. Rain had begun falling, thin streaks sliding down the glass. Margaret loved rainy afternoons. She always claimed they forced people to slow down long enough to think. I wished Daniel had inherited that part of her. Instead, he inherited my stubbornness. Without my conscience, About 30 minutes later, Ben called Rachel over the hallway radio. She listened quietly, then looked toward me. They found Melissa. Where? In the hospital chapel. Was she praying? Rachel hesitated. Then what was she doing? She was using a disposable phone. My heartbeat quickened. Calling who? Rachel answered softly. Your son. Security confiscated the phone. There were only 3 numbers stored inside. Daniel, a local real estate broker, and someone listed only as buyer. Charles slowly stood. What buyer? Rachel shook her head. We don't know yet. Ben walked back into the room carrying a small evidence bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper recovered from Melissa's purse. He handed it to me. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a contract. It was a handwritten checklist. Every item had already been crossed out. Visit hospital. Keep Emma away. Delay lawyer. Destroy old paperwork. Only one line remained unchecked. At the bottom of the page, written in different ink, get signature before midnight. Charles stared at the words, then looked at me. Walter, I don't think they're trying to stop you from signing. I frowned. Then what are they trying to do? He pointed to the final sentence. They're trying to make you sign something else. Before anyone could respond, the hospital room door slowly opened. Daniel stepped inside. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was smiling. And in his hand was a folder that looked exactly like the one containing my new will. For a long moment, no one moved. Daniel stood in the doorway wearing the same charcoal jacket Rachel had seen the night before. His hair was neatly combed. His smile looked almost rehearsed. If someone had walked past the room, they would have assumed he was simply a loving son visiting his father. Only the people inside knew better. He looked directly at me. Dad. His voice was calm. I'm glad you're feeling better. Rachel immediately stepped between us. You need to leave. Daniel barely looked at her. This is a family matter. Charles quietly stood beside my bed. No, it's now a legal matter. Daniel's smile faded slightly. He raised the folder in his hand. I think everyone is overreacting. I only came to help my father finish his estate planning. I stared at him. Estate planning? Yes. You've always said hospitals remind people what's important. He slowly placed the folder on the bedside table. I brought the paperwork. Charles didn't even open it. Instead, he asked one simple question. Who prepared these documents? Daniel shrugged. A lawyer. What lawyer? I don't remember his name. Charles smiled for the first time. A real attorney never forgets to place his name on legal documents. Daniel didn't answer. Rachel reached for the folder. Daniel quickly placed his hand over it. I'd rather my father read it first. No, I said quietly. I'd rather my attorney read it. Charles opened the folder. The room became silent. Every page looked remarkably similar to the draft will I'd reviewed weeks earlier. The formatting, the legal language, even the page numbers. Then Charles reached the signature page. He stopped, slowly removed his glasses, and looked directly at Daniel. You copied my work. Daniel crossed his arms. So Charles turned the final page toward me. This leaves every asset to your son. My eyes moved across the paper. The farmhouse, the lake cabin, my savings, Margaret's jewelry, the farmland, everything. There was even a signature line waiting for me. Daniel stepped closer. Dade, I know you've had a rough night. I don't want lawyers filling your head with ideas. This is what Mom would have wanted. I looked at him for a long time, then quietly asked, when was the last time you visited your mother's grave? His expression changed. What does that have to do with anything? You didn't answer. He looked away. I've been busy. I nodded slowly. I visit every Sunday. Do you know what I tell her? Nobody spoke. I tell her I'm trying to remember the little boy she raised. I looked him straight in the eyes. But every time you walk into this room, he disappears a little more. Daniel's voice hardened. Enough. He pushed the papers toward me. Sign them. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You owe me. The room froze. Ooh, I spent years waiting. For what? For my inheritance. Emma gasped quietly. Daniel continued as though he hadn't heard her. I've built my life expecting this family farm. You promised it would be mine. I slowly shook my head. I promised you the chance to build something, not the right to take what someone else built. His face twisted with anger. You'd rather give everything to Emma. I'd rather leave it to someone who still visits because she loves me. Daniel suddenly reached for the papers. Charles stepped between us. So that's your plan, Daniel snapped. You stay out of this. I'm trying to save my father's estate. Charles looked at him calmly. No, you're trying to steal it. Daniel laughed bitterly. Can you prove that? Rachel quietly answered from behind him. The hospital can. Everyone looked toward her. She held a tablet. Security finished reviewing every camera. She placed it on the bedside table. The video began playing. There was no audio. It didn't need any. The footage showed Daniel entering room 412, Melissa standing beside the door, Daniel looking over both shoulders. Then he reached behind the ventilator, pulled the power cord from the wall. Melissa smiled. She leaned close enough for the hallway camera to capture her lips. Even without sound, everyone in the room already knew what she'd said. 5 more minutes, and everything we ever wanted is ours. Daniel stared at the screen. His confidence vanished. Ben Lawson stepped into the room with 2 sheriff's deputies. Daniel Hayes. He lowered his head. You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Daniel didn't fight. As deputies placed handcuffs around his wrists, he looked at me one last time. I was your son. I nodded. You still are. His eyes filled with tears. Then why are you doing this? My voice remained steady. I'm not doing this. You made your choices. I'm simply refusing to protect you from them. The deputies escorted him into the hallway. For several moments, no one spoke. 2 weeks later, Charles returned with the real documents. This time there were no interruptions, no fake paperwork, no hidden agendas, only me, Emma, Rachel, and Charles. I signed every page. When I finished, Charles smiled. It's done. I looked at Emma. She was crying again. Grandpa, I don't deserve this. I smiled. Exactly. That's why you're receiving it. 6 months later, I left the hospital for the last time. Emma drove me home. The farmhouse looked exactly the way Margaret had loved it. The front porch swings still creaked. The old maple tree still shaded the yard. Rachel visited once a month after that. She always claimed she just wanted to check on her favorite stubborn patient. I knew the truth. Sometimes the people who save your life become part of it. Every evening, Emma and I sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the fields. One afternoon she asked, Grandpa, if Rachel hadn't walked into your room when she did, what do you think would have happened? I looked toward the sunset, then quietly answered, I would have lost more than my life. I would have lost my faith that good people still show up exactly when they're needed. The ventilator kept my lungs alive that night, but it was one nurse's courage that gave me the chance to keep living.